As you know, on this channel, I do a lot of Modern and Pioneer, coverage, basically, whether it's going over some of the decks that are, tier 1 in the format that you absolutely need to be on the lookout for if you're going to play against them, something you should consider playing in the format as well. If you don't really have a place to start, or maybe you don't want to play the deck that you are currently playing, if you have one that you're currently playing, all the way to kind of studying some of the big hits of the format that have kind of fallen out of favor. And I've definitely went over my fair share of cards on my channel that used to see the light of day, were cards that were very powerful, back in their time, but now have just kind of gotten pushed out because of power creep. Maybe they just don't line up with what the format currently thinks is powerful and what is actually going on. So I figured this would be the perfect video to kind of list some cards that I would kind of want to see in the Pioneer format that used to be kind of these modern and even to a point multi-format all-stars in older formats, and I think would be okay to bring back into a more modern format, being the Pioneer format. Some of these are going to come with caveats, obviously. I think that some of these will be very fun, that they're a little bit more powered down in a lower power level format, but still have the potential to be powerful in some other cases as well. So this isn't by no means meant to be like these cards would be perfectly fine if you just plug them into the format right now and start playing them. And maybe some of them could be, as I plan on doing at least another one of these videos in the future. But this is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be like a theoretical thing. You can tell me that I'm wrong or whatever in the comments and everything. That's totally fine. This is just my opinion of cards that I would want to see in the format, that I would want to try to play in the format and just kind of relive a little bit of nostalgia while not like absolutely breaking the format. We're not going to be reprinting Black Lotus or, Time Spirals or anything like that. We're playing cards that would be in theory okay, maybe a little bit of tweaking to get them into the format that could do something kind of interesting and a little bit more powered in a more powered down format. So before we get too deep into the list, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos, I do a lot of Modern and Pioneer content and some longer form videos as well. So if that's anything that interests you, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you'd like to support me even further, I do have channel memberships as well. You can get access to some pretty cool perks, and the list plans on expanding kind of the more that the channel expands and everything. We're on the road to 1K subscribers, and we are on the fast track to getting there. So I appreciate all the support that all of you have given me so far this year and, years past. I really do appreciate it. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at our first card that I think would be pretty cool to print into the Pioneer format. So the first card we're going to go over is the one that has probably the biggest asterisk tied to it, and that's the card Mistress Bobble. I think that this would be an interesting card to add to the Pioneer format if you ban some of the delve spells like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. I think that these are kind of okay if you have like Gurmag Angler and Hooting Mandrills and those kind of things. Even like Murderer's Cut's fine, like being able to have like a bit of a cheaper, destroy target creature spell is like fine. Playing one of those threats are fine just because those cards aren't really like the most playable now. I think Murderer's Cut sometimes shows up in like sideboards, maybe makes the main deck, but there are just some more efficient removal spells that aren't very conditional. Mistress Bobble as well, a lot of its power, I mean, even the fact that it was discovered late into Modern where, years after it was printed, then people really started like playing and abusing it, to go with ways of drawing extra cards, ways to get information, ways to kind of manipulate your deck to draw cards that you want to draw and then get rid of the cards that you don't necessarily want to draw right now. Things like that. I mean, Mistress Bobble has just been a very versatile card in Modern, and even though it sees less play now, it is a card that does kind of generate some interesting kind of like value plays where, with a format with fetch lands, you could use Mistress Bobble to kind of like get a scry in a way of your own library to then, shuffle a card away if you don't want it, or play a different land if you want to actually draw the card that is on top of your library. There's kind of like these nuances of when to play Bobble if you want to actually, crack it to look at your opponent's top of your opponent's deck, draw a card on their turn. If you want to enable something like Revolts, and then we have like Fatal Pushes that trigger a little bit easier. All things that I don't think are necessarily the worst to have in the Pioneer format. Again, like these cards definitely don't have to be printed in the format, but I think that these would be a lot of fun. I think Mistress Bobble kind of loses a little bit more of its kind of like nuance and fun things to do when you don't have the Khans of Tarkir fetch lands that are previously the Onslaught fetch lands in the format. But you do kind of get to trigger like Ledger Shredders on turn 2, which is totally fine. Of course, in our hypothetical scenario, Treasure Cruise is banned, so this is like a way that the Is It Phoenix decks can kind of get that card advantage, or at least ways of discarding their Phoenixes into the graveyard and still getting to kind of do their thing and still kind of cantrip and whatnot. It's not going to help them bring them back by any means, but it does help with casting like Ledger Shredders on turn 2, because now you have something to play on turn 2 along with the Ledger Shredder to trigger it, which again, I don't think is necessarily the most powerful thing in the world given what is going on in some of the other decks. Of course, this is kind of like a 4 of in a lot of them, so that could be toxic in that way. But really, if there's a ton of decks playing Mistress Bobble, to me, it's kind of like a who cares kind of thing. Again, there is probably some synergies out there that I'm not thinking of, but in the current format, if you just ban Treasure Cruise and you allowed something like Mistress Bobble, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world. Does it really add a lot to the format, or does it do anything interesting or whatever? No, it probably doesn't, which means that it probably doesn't need to be printed. But Mistress Bobble is just kind of a fun card to play, and then giving players like a new environment to kind of tool around with this card and try to find, like the most optimal way, or like the different ways that you can get the most out of just seeing the top card of like a player's library and then getting to draw a card the next turn is something that interests me enough to where I would want to see Mistress Bobble, allowed for some time. Again, not in conjunction with the most of the delve spells, again, like getting to draw 3 cards or getting to look at 7 and pick 2 is probably too good. I think getting to get Gurmag Anglers out maybe a turn sooner or whatnot, maybe, and I guess if you want to even pair those cards with something like the evolution cards or whatever, sure, fine. Like maybe that's not something that you necessarily want to have happen. But in either case, for, the off chance that there's some pretty broken like combo decks, getting to play like the big delve creatures and then getting to transform them into something else, I think Mistress Bobble would be kind of a neat addition to at least mess around with in Pioneer as well. So that's card number 1. Let's go ahead and move on to our second card. Second, we have Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster Mage is a 2-mana 2/1 flash that gives an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard flashback until end turns. Flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So Snapcaster Mage, back in the day, again, like the mid-2010s, even like the 2013s or whatever, from Standard into Modern, and even some play in Legacy, just getting to flashback one of your more important, maybe one of your more powerful instant sorceries has always been really good. And Snapcaster Mage is just, in general, a fun card to play. We know that its power level is kind of tied to how good a flash 2-mana 2/1 is. We know that getting to pay 2 extra mana to, maybe on your opponent's turn, play something like an Opt or like a Consider is fine. Getting to play a Snapcaster Mage and get back a removal spell is fine. Like, we know that stuff is very good, but it's always like the 2/1 body. And I don't think the 2/1 body is necessarily very impressive in the Pioneer format currently, which I think makes Snapcaster Mage at least a consideration to bring back in the format. It does kind of conflict with the current delve spells that we have in the format, like in Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, what have you. So like it is kind of a real cost to playing with it. That said, of course, you have Is It Phoenix getting to play some of its other cheap cantrips, and this is like a way that, they have excess mana that they're going to be able to like play Snapcaster Mages, and that's going to get them to get back their cantrips, which essentially gives them more copies of those sort of things. And like Grixis mid-range decks, it gives them more access to the like Thought Seizes and discard spells and things like that, which is something that, every format that's had Snapcaster Mage has had to contend with, is being able to flash back, 1-mana cantrips or 2-mana cantrips, and then flashing back, discard spells, maybe even certain removal spells, things like Lightning Bolt and what have you. And it being a wizard as well could also make, blue-red, slick shot / wizard decks, more viable by having essentially a one-sided Lightning Bolt, because most of the decks aren't going to be able to play Lightning Bolt with Wizard's Lightning, of course, being a little bit cheaper thanks to controlling a wizard. So it just overall, I think, creates kind of like this interesting kind of like counterplay. I think it makes control decks a lot better as well, because again, while the 2/1 body maybe in a vacuum where if you just play it by itself isn't all that impressive, or maybe even getting like a discard spell really isn't all that great, I think like in a control shell, if you're able to, pair it with some of the spree spells where you're able to, flash back 3 steps ahead and you're able to like Snapcaster Mage, counter a spell, draw 2, discard a card is going to be very powerful. Call against command going to be very powerful. It just kind of makes playing some of these other cards that are like pretty efficient that can do a lot of work a little bit more tantalizing to like want to play with, because we know that flashing back the 1 and 2 mana instants and sorceries are going to be pretty good, but it's getting like to 3, even like 4 mana if you want to get that crazy is where this is going to be very powerful. So I definitely like the idea of having Snapcaster Mage. I think it'd be interesting. I know we have something like this kind of effect in Pioneer already in, I believe it's Mission Briefing, which is like double blue. I think it's a lot harder to play when you're playing like double blue into, a spell that you want to cast. It might be a little bit color intensive. So I think Snapcaster Mage, like the 2/1 body, offers just a little bit more than getting to Surveil 2, and just an easier time casting it, along with getting to flashback some pretty powerful spells as well. Again, is this going to be something that absolutely breaks the format? Is it something that the format needs? Again, probably not, but I think having a place where Snapcaster Mage is a, at least a viable card, again, in like a lower power level format than, compared to Modern Legacy, I think Snapcaster Mage would be a pretty welcome addition to the format. Again, at least something worth trying and looking into, in a world where, it is kind of more of like a plug and play kind of card than it would be, like Mistress Bobble, where you probably have to ban a few things first to get to a point where Mistress Bobble isn't, just immediately slam dunked into every deck, and then all of those decks are also playing like 4 Treasure Cruise and things like that. So that's my number 2 card. That's Snapcaster Mage. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last card that I have pulled up here. And yeah, they basically went in order of like how playable they would be in, because then we have AdNauseum. This card is absolutely insane. The artwork is absolutely cursed, and it gets more cursed the more that you look at it and stuff. Personally, it's probably one of my favorite arts in Magic, but I have very fond memories of AdNauseum. There was a combo deck of the name in Modern way back when. It was the first deck that I actually played in Modern. Took it to one of the biggest GPs at the time, and did reasonably well, considering that I was basically just brand new to the Modern format. This combo deck was like super crazy, and I wanted to play it just because it looked like it was a lot of fun. Of course, it was also a staple in Legacy Storm for a while until we got like Peer into the Abyss, and I think it's kind of between Abyss and AdNauseum. I think they play both. But it used to just be AdNauseum would be like the thing that you would get. So AdNauseum for 5 mana would reveal the top card of your library. You put that card in your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost, and you may repeat this process any number of times. So also a fun fact, I learned that AdNauseum, this is a while ago, that AdNauseum basically means to like just do the same thing over and over and over again. So, it's kind of neat that like the effect of the card does actually kind of reference the name and like the definition of the card. So just something pretty cool. But as we know, AdNauseum, you losing life to draw cards is not a bad thing. But definitely when you play a card like AdNauseum, you are building around it in a way to where you're able to maximize the amount of value from this. You're not playing AdNauseum more than likely in a deck that has multiple copies of AdNauseum. You could, but obviously drawing another AdNauseum and losing 5 life is not very ideal. I think the Pioneer format is pretty fast, so I think just having AdNauseum legal in the format is kind of like a neutering to itself when you consider the fact that you have, Slick Shot aggro decks, you have the Amalia combo decks, you have Phoenix, you have the Rakdos midrange decks, the Rakdos Vampires decks, where AdNauseum is just inherently, violent to it. The format is actively kind of against what AdNauseum is trying to do, where you want to end up putting multiple cards in your hand and more than likely winning that turn or winning on the next turn and finding a way to kind of circumvent the life loss and everything. While I could see AdNauseum kind of slotting into some of these like bigger mana decks, like a tier 3 strategy throughout like just about every format except for like one standard format in particular, in like a Turbo Fog deck where you're able to just kind of put a bunch of cards in your hand. You're able to buffer and like keep your life total pretty high with some of your prevent all damage spells, to them where you can get to the point where you can cast an AdNauseum, you can end up drawing back up to like 7 or 8 cards, what have you, hit your land drops and things like that. It just, AdNauseum is such an interesting card, and it probably is one of my favorite cards of all time. you know, this is a card, like, I went out and I went and bought foil copies of this card to, like, frame, just because I absolutely love the art. I love all the nostalgia that it brings and everything. And I think in terms of, like, what the Pioneer format is doing and what it is up to, I think AdNauseum is a fine card. I think that if you're going to play something like AdNauseum, like in something like Lotus Field, which is a deck that sees play in Pioneer, they're going to opt for Peer into the Abyss if they want an effect like this, because you just on average get to draw more cards for less life. Of course, you have a lot more mana that you have to put into it. I believe it's like 8 mana or something like that versus 5. But, you know, AdNauseum, again, is just kind of like a card that is really interesting in a format that doesn't have Storm as a mechanic in the set. You have, you know, less, like, more expensive things that you want to draw with AdNauseum. So more than likely, it's going to be a card that, like, ends up drawing maybe like 2 or 3 cards on average, you know, and just ends up being kind of probably lackluster. But there's definitely something here where you can, you know, put yourself out there to, like, drawing a bunch of cards. Of course, we have, like, a few enchantments that, you know, prevent you from losing the game in AdNauseum. You know, you can kind of, like, again, circumvent kind of the life loss and whatnot, and make things kind of sweet. So AdNauseum is like a card that I would want to see it printed in more formats, because I want the chance to play this card in more formats, and it not necessarily, I mean, you probably still get laughed at if you played this card in Pioneer, to be honest, but it, you know, at least in a lower power level format, I think it would be interesting to kind of tool around and play around with. So that is my feeling. Those are my 3 cards that I would want to see in the Pioneer format. I plan on doing at least another series of these videos. I want to try to get one for each color. I think that there's just a lot of cards that are legal in Modern and Legacy that used to actually see play in the format. Used to be, you know, some pretty consistent and big players in the format that just don't see play anymore, thanks to kind of the power creep. And maybe even in Pioneer as well, they're not really all that good. Maybe I'm just giving them a little bit more credit. I mean, definitely AdNauseum, I'm giving a lot of credit, and I'm vouching for pretty hard here. You know, being a card that, you know, could potentially see any inkling of play in Pioneer. This card could just be power creeped out of, you know, just a pure existence, period. But, you know, the rest of the cards and some of the other cards that I kind of have listed and I want to go over, I think are at least fun ideas to kind of, like, think and kind of play with. Of course, you know, there's probably some alterations you have to make to the format, and alterations being that they're not necessarily bad for the format. I think that they're changes I could take now, and then you could just not add the cards that, you know, we talked about here today. So I think at least pretty interesting. Let me know in the comments down below if there's any card that, you know, you played with in Modern Pioneer, a card that you're nostalgia with that isn't legal in Pioneer that you would like to see in the Pioneer format play around with. Maybe what changes you would make to the format to make the card, you know, playable in the format, or maybe not too busted with some of the other things that are legal in the format. And of course, you're subscribed to the channel and you want to see more content, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And of course, if you would like to support me even further, maybe for a monetary value, I do have channel memberships as well that basically all that stuff's going to the channel anyway to kind of improve the setup and everything else that we do here, and you get access to some pretty cool perks as well. So that's going to be me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.